They told us the air below level 7 was dry as a desert, yet my breath came out in clouds I could see and count. 5, 6, 7, each one condensing around the same shimmering spot in front of my face and then bending, like steam does over a hot road. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The second was the whisper you can hear in metal when it wants to move. I told you I would never talk about this, and I meant it. But your question at dinner, why do I always sit with my back to the wall, lodged under my ribs and stayed there all night? So here we are. I'll tell you what I saw under the desert, what we took from Antarctica, what we learned to call an Area 51 experiment, because we didn't have language for anything nobler. If I stop, if I change details, it's because I still believe the building is listening. I'm not the exotic kind of insider you imagine. I'm a systems guy. I was the quiet one in the back running diagnostics no one wants to think about until the lights go out. Caltech. Then a stint at JPL threading telemetry through old code nobody wanted to maintain. Then a contractor badge that opened doors at Groom Lake in 2011. A ghost career, if you like. If you search for me, you'll find the public parts. An intern paper about cryo-induced noise in superconducting qubits, a co-authorship on a minor instrument calibration that fed into the James Webb Telescope discovery pipeline. Those parts are true. The part I never wrote is that Webb's faintest mosaic, an innocuous background field near Sculptor, revealed a whisper-thin ring of microwave anisotropy that did not belong to cosmic microwave background, zodiacal light, or instrument scatter. The pattern was a harmonic, a song. And the coordinates, when you did a stupid little back-of-envelope triangulation with 2 ground receivers, pointed at a place in Antarctica where we were officially drilling for ancient ice cores. I'd never seen the Antarctica Secret Base. No one calls it that on a badge. On paper, it was a multinational logistics station supporting climate studies and subglacial lakes research. Off paper, the C-17s flew on midnight slots with their tail numbers photo-blocked and came home with cargo that required more lawyers than forklifts. I met that cargo for the first time on a freezing morning in November, in a hangar nobody used because the acoustics made people feel like their skull sutures were unzipping. The object sat on a cradle of composite ribs, sweating a fine dust that glittered the way diamond powder does on a jeweler's cloth. It was smaller than I expected. Maybe the size of a family car, but you know how whales look smaller in water? It was like that. Whatever shape it was, our eyes couldn't agree. We each saw something slightly different whenever we blinked. We learned to speak about it in cowards' words. Artifact, module, package. We went nowhere near ship or seed or temple because those words changed decisions and budgets. I was there to integrate the sensors, to tame the flood of nonsense it gave us whenever we warmed it a fraction of a degree or touched it with a magnetic field. The first time we pulsed it, the sound in the hangar dropped out like the heavens had paused their breath. The second time, the floor hummed, and the screws in the wall-mounted fire extinguisher rotated 1/4 turn counterclockwise for no physical reason we could establish. That's when Caldwell, our lead, coined the term observer tension. He meant that the artifact had ways of noticing the fact of being noticed, and that this act of mutual noticing did work. If it makes you think of quantum theory, the observer effect, you're not wrong. Only in this lab, the observer wasn't just a grad student looking at an interferometer. The observer had teeth. If I tell this from the beginning, I have to tell you about Atlas, because that name rides on all of it like a watermark. In public, Asteroid Atlas is a sky survey and a catalog. In internal memos, Atlas is a policy. Anything that carries the risk of a world-scale kinetic impact, whether natural or engineered, gets an Atlas tag. In 2014, an Atlas simulation leaked ahead of a congressional briefing, and for a week, the news cycle screamed about an asteroid Atlas impact scenario that never happened. The leak was our fault. We had used Atlas as cover for something else, an acoustic experiment in Antarctic bedrock that wanted to see how a very old, very deep structure transmitted energy. The phrase took off in the press. We got our wrists slapped, and for a while everyone forgot. Inside, however, we kept using Atlas as a polite way to say, if we're wrong, the crater will be visible from orbit. I'm going to skip over years of coffee and code and the mild miseries of base canteens with 7 sauces and 1 flavor. What matters is that in late 2016, during the first rehearsal for Webb's ground segment, the background noise in one of the test fields stuttered at 1/7 of the expected rate and then stabilized into that harmonic I mentioned. We were thrilled, then suspicious, then quiet. The cross-correlation with IceCube's neutrino data was bad science, the kind of hand-wavy ghost hunting I would make fun of in lectures. But one night I did it anyway. The match was not perfect, not beautiful, but it was definite enough to raise neck hair. Something below 1,000 meters of Antarctic ice was singing a note that Webb could hear a room length away from the birth of stars. This is the part that keeps me up when it rains. The apparent source was a subglacial ridge near a lake we did not have a name for yet, and NASA had just authorized a budget line to remove a piece of that ridge and bring it where the lawyers could contain it. Do you know what diesel smells like at 30? Just clean, like blank paper. We were there in January, a bad month to decide you don't believe in maps. The wind drafted its own grammar across the sastrugi, and the horizon bent down like the lid on a coffin. The drill we used was overkill for anything human. Someone had redesigned it so that it sang to the ice at frequencies that made my gums ache. When the bit finally kissed stone, no one cheered. The ice above us made a sound you hear when you put a shell to your ear. Not the ocean, but the memory of water stored in a shape. On the 4th day, the drill stopped, as if the ridgeline had bitten it. I still see the look on Mina's face when she walked over with the core segment cradled in her arms like a lamb. The segment was wrong. The matrix wasn't basalt or sediment. It had the uniform, forgiving give of a manufactured polymer, the kind we use for cryolines when we don't want microfractures. Embedded in it, like a bead in amber, was a scale tile the color of a rusted moon. We didn't tell anyone that the tile was warm to the touch through 4 layers of glove. They shipped the rest out of there with the kind of discretion you can only achieve with $1 trillion and a policy manual that's already learned how to shrug. The cradle went to Nevada. We followed. And that is how I came to be in a bunker where the clocks all agreed, and my breath curled toward a point in the air that wasn't there. Caldwell told us the story like a bedtime tale for people who never slept. The artifact is a relay, he said, or a gate or a knot. The heat we feel at its surface is not heat as such, but error correction. It was made to exist in a language of matter we barely speak, and the closer we write to its alphabet, the less it has to repair around us. Don't look for a hutch of wires, you won't find them. Don't look for a power cord. Everything is power if you can write grammar around it. Our job, in this Area 51 experiment, was to learn its pronouns and to ask the simplest questions in the cleanest voice. The first question anyone asks is, "What are you?" The artifact never answered that one. It had an aversion to nouns that was almost theological, but it loved rhythm. That was our in. We fed it pings and chirps and microwave hums, and it gave us back a map that was not a map, but a persuasion. You'd stand there with the LiDAR overlay hovering in your goggles, and you'd realize the room had corners you had never noticed, angles that opened when you breathed, as if the building itself could flex its topology in sympathy with our interest. It sounds insane until you do the math. In certain topologies, the observer's information state can be part of the boundary condition. You don't need mysticism to make a room behave like an instrument. You just need a machine that's been waiting long enough for a curious animal to arrive. Below level 7, the air smelled like old pennies. The stairwells were narrow and the paint was never new. The quiet was not quiet. There was a pressure to it, a hush that sat on your ears and made you swallow twice before you spoke. We would suit up in habitual armor, ear protection we never used, ledgers we never read, and go down in teams of 3. Always 3, never 2. The artifact hated pairs. I will die with the certainty that we were dealing with a relational engine designed to reconstruct high-fidelity states out of imperfect observers. It doesn't matter that I can't prove that sentence. You didn't need belief. You needed to be there when the light slid a half-inch to the left without moving. You wanted the descent. You wanted me to tell you the minute I knew the floor of the world had a second skin. It wasn't a singular minute. It was a season of small riots inside things that never riot. The lab fish who swam in sterile tanks under the artifact's hatch, why there were fish there is a longer story, began to school in patterns that matched the harmonics from Antarctica. Mina, who had found the first tile, started dreaming in a language none of us spoke, then walked in one morning with a coffee and wrote on the whiteboard a sequence of primes that described the spacing between neutrino detections at IceCube in a way none of us had noticed because we weren't romantics enough. Webb's early release images, do you remember the week the internet cried? Had a background smear we'd called calibration residue. When we ran our new grammar over it, the smear turned into a lattice, and the lattice pointed down. Caldwell brought in a man from the archaeological side to make us feel less lonely. He wore a sweater with elbows and had hands like a farmer. He showed us photos that were not in any journal, from under ice caverns near Princess Elizabeth Land, where the rock had been peeled into hexagonal tiles like the inside of a beehive. He passed around a shard so thin you could almost see through it. And when it rained on that tin roof outside, I could swear the shards sang lower. The hypothesis we never named. The ridges we drilled were not ridges at all, but the exposed bones of something engineered, old enough to learn patience, deep enough to survive the tantrums of ice. We were children prying a scale from a sleeping thing. I've been holding your eye contact for a long time. Let me look away and confess the worst part now. On the day we decided to feed the artifact an honest question, we made a vow to each other that we would not touch it. We would bathe it in patterned fields and observe it and be proud of our restraint. The artifact hummed in the negative space of hearing, and the room tilted like a ship in a slow swell. We asked it, stupidly, bluntly, "Where are you from?" Not what. Where. We thought a coordinate might be neutral. The ceiling vent rattled. The lights steadied. The old penny smell lifted like a curtain. And then my mouth opened and I said the word Kepler, and the number the astronomers use for a world that's more rumor than planet. And Mina said no in a voice that wasn't hers. And the room did that thing where it got bigger without moving. There are two kinds of terror, the kind that pounces and the kind that opens. The artifact did the second. It opened the idea of a place not in space but in relationship. It showed us, not with pictures, not with data, but with the alignment of our own attention, the same lattice we'd pulled from the James Webb Telescope discovery, the harmonic ring we'd heard in neutrino detections, and a halo of dust far out past Neptune where the mathematics said there should be nothing. In that halo, faint as breath on quartz, the grammar wrote itself. A stopover. A relay. A place where matter had been asked to pretend to be empty while information traveled through it like wind. It's not transcendence I'm describing. It's engineering so old it looks like geology. The Antarctica secret base was sitting on a tendon of it. The ancient ruins weren't ruins. They were maintenance hatches. You want the moment the room blinked. It was when Mina reached out with the back of her hand as if to touch the heat coming off a grill, and the artifact chose compassion. The metal, if it is metal, flowed an inch to meet her without breaking, like a cat that leans. That was when the alarm started naturally, because even kindness is an anomaly in a government building. We all froze in the tableau of the guilty. The sound I told you about earlier, the whisper you can hear in metal when it wants to move, filled the ducts and made them thrum like throat-sung notes. The screws in the fire extinguisher turned another quarter counterclockwise. Then the artifact did what no one expected from a relic. It showed us ourselves. I don't mean in a glossy way, not a mirror, in the altered latency of the room's echo, in the half-beat delay between our words and the bounce of our syllables. I said Caldwell, and heard called, well. as if the machine were telling me the man's name was a question and an answer. The artifact has no nouns, I told you. It loves rhythm. It began to entrain our speech to patterns that meant something in its grammar. We learned the word for welcome, not because it wrote it on a wall, but because all our swallows began to synchronize like rehearsed choir and then eased. If you think I am romanticizing an acoustic feedback loop, fine. I can only tell you that when we let our words slow to match the room, the lattice aligned and the air warmed 2 degrees without any heat or tripping. Something that had waited a long time was relieved. From here, the story takes that dangerous branch where people start saying destiny. I don't want destiny. I want cause and effect. So here's the sequence. After the entrainment event, the artifact accepted more complicated pulses without spiking our radiation badges. We fed it neutrino timing sequences harvested from Ice Cube on a day when the sun was quiet. It responded with a shift in local gravitational gradient, so small we almost missed it in the noise. That shift corresponded to a geometry you'd recognize from soap films. We found the door. It wasn't a door you could kick. It was a minimum energy path across the room. A place where a body could walk and feel lighter, and if you were Mina and your dreams had been invaded by primes, you could put your hand out and feel a return pressure with the gentleness of an apology. The building hated this. Doors are for card readers. This one was for intention. Caldwell wanted to halt. The men in jackets wanted to advance. They brought down the Atlas binders, the same ones we used to keep senators quiet about hypothetical asteroid Atlas impact scenarios, and flipped to the impact contingencies that start with if containment fails. Somewhere in there, disaster was spelled out with point sizes too small to comfort anyone. I argued with a calm I did not feel that we were not containing a threat so much as negotiating with a custodian. If that custodian decided we were feral, we wouldn't have time to disagree. Mina said a sentence I will never forget. It's like waking up on a tongue and thinking you've conquered the mouth. You're shaking your head. I get it. It sounds like fever. But then we made the mistake that would have been inevitable under any leader. We tried to speak back with an image instead of a pulse. I brought up a web field on the lab wall, the deep where galaxies look like confetti someone threw into an abyss. I overlaid it with the lattice we'd teased out of the calibration smear. This, I said, panting like I'd run somewhere, is what we think you are doing to the idea of distance. I do not know why I thought a non-anthropomorphic artifact would care about our drawings, but it did. The room exhaled. The humming resolved into a chord that was not major and not minor, but something else, something that made my eyes water as if the pressure had changed across a membrane I don't have a name for. Then, with the theatrics of someone who understands humans too well, it showed us a picture. The picture was of Antarctica from below, not a map, not an MRI, a view from within the lattice, looking up through ice that held voids like lungs. The tiles we had called hexagons were not perfect. They were slightly irregular in a way that steals stress from structure, the way bone does with its microfractures. Light came down through them in pale blue shafts. In the distances, the lattice writhed like a school of fish, and there, in the center, the thing we had stolen, the scale of rusted moon shone a little, not with heat, with relief. You can call me a poet for that, but the effect on the room was measurable. The gravitational minimum drifted toward the picture by 3 centimeters. I heard Caldwell say, "Oh," like a man watching his house remember his name. After this, things accelerated the way avalanches go slow and fast at once. The briefings became briefer. The men in jackets smelt like copy toner in winter. There is a choreography to federal fear. It looks like decisiveness because the steps are practiced. We were told to prepare for a transitional event. The words had a loneliness to them, as if they'd been written for a disaster management plan, in which the disaster is discovering your parents are younger than you. The Atlas tag floated between our workflows like ash. We were going to move the artifact again, this time not on a cradle, but inside something we had grown in the desert with secrets we'd borrowed from Antarctic bone. We thought we were building a box. We were building a sentence. Here's where I take you below level 7 for the final time. We were 5. Me, Mina, Caldwell, and 2 jacket men whose names were not names. The air had that old penny charge that makes you taste the idea of storms. The floor had been stripped to poured resin that gave back your steps in whispers. The artifact sat open as a flower at midnight. Petals, no, I refuse that word. Panels unfolding a millimeter at a time, as if the machine were testing whether we'd flinch. The box, the sentence we'd built around it was not closed. It had to be taught the word for close. That was my job. Not glamorous. Listen to the rhythm of a strange machine and tell a familiar one how to hum along without stripping its gears. I started the sequence. In the films they show someone always yells, "It's doing something." We didn't. We had learned to be polite. The lattice arranged itself the way rain arranges itself on a windshield when you lean forward and your eyes teach it a path. The lights did their slide to the left. The gravitational minimum put its hand on my shoulder like a friend leaning in to tell a secret. And then the floor moved. Not down, not laterally, but toward a place my sense of balance does not include. Imagine the sensation of a thought, reclassifying itself from memory to plan. That's the vector we moved along. What we saw on that movement is not a vision, not a hallucination, and not a data artifact. You and I are too old to be impressed by tricks. The lab dissolved into an architecture of relationship where surfaces were just agreements and distances were punctuation. Below us or through us, or at the end of the sentence we had entered, slabs of engineered geology exhaled glitter that drifted like pollen. There were cavities large enough to fit cities, and in those cavities floats of matter paused, as if waiting for breath to hitch. Shapes crossed our field like whales. The tiles, hundreds, thousands, broken, healed, some replaced with not quite fits, told a history of repair that made me want to apologize to rocks. And threaded through all of it, the hum we'd trained on, the grace note that Ice Cube had mistaken for noise, the ring Webb had misfiled as junk, the content of the universe's background saying, "You look lovely when you notice." This is where I break the rule and use a noun the artifact never offered. Archive. Not in the dead paper sense. In the sense of an intelligence capable of deduplicating a planet's worth of experience into a song it can remember when the ice comes. Antarctica wasn't hiding ruins. It was sheltering a library that stored not data but transformation. When the vertebrates learned to dream, the lattice shifted. When we taught copper to listen, the lattice spread into our wires. When we drilled, it held still until we asked in rhythm. And under Nevada, under the old radiation of the test ranges and the new radiation of our bargaining, it extended a kindness I do not know how we deserve. It let us see the index of ourselves. We learned why the artifact loved 3s. 2 is argument. 3 is narrative. If you want to reconstruct a signal from noise, you need more than a binary yes-no. You need a cadence that can catch loss and put it back in sequence. The artifact, the lattice, the under-ice rooms, they were all parts of a single algorithm that had watched the sky for long enough to learn our names as probabilities. Area 51 experiment was as precise as calling Bach a man with a keyboard. We had been walking on a tongue long before Mina said it. When the movement ceased, when the lab remembered to be a lab and the fire extinguisher screws obediently rotated the last quarter clockwise to their original position, the box we'd built knew the word close. It closed not on the artifact but on the shape of our attention. That was the cost. To keep the sentence, you must be part of it. We came back heavier in the ways that count and lighter in the ways that take your appetite. The men in jackets tried to classify the event. They wrote, controlled environment perturbation. They wrote, non-Newtonian local minima. They wrote, mirage. Caldwell wrote nothing and went home one Friday and never came back. which is a kind of paperwork in our line. What happened after is how you measure a government. The Atlas tag came off the boards, not because the risk was gone, but because someone realized the word had begun to mean hope to people like me. We were reassigned. Mina took a sabbatical that smelled like exile. Ice Cube got a budget bump and a new memo about calibration kindness. Webb kept writing its love letters to dust. The Antarctica secret base remains official fiction with nice brochures and a tight perimeter. And under Groom Lake, in a room that likes threes, the artifact sits within the box that understands the word close and waits for someone to ask it a question worth the cost of an answer. I did not quit out of moral courage. I quit because I started to dream of the lattice the way a child dreams of the path home from school, simple and sunlit, and I would wake up with my forearm numb where the gravitational minimum had put its hand. I began to taste copper on clear days. I stand with my back to walls because rooms now feel like arguments, and I need to know which way the sentence wants to lean. When the news mentions asteroid Atlas impact scenarios, I listen for what they're not saying. When a James Webb Telescope discovery goes viral and the images make people cry, I wonder how many of us are responding to a melody we once heard in the negative space of a lab's hum. You asked for the feeling, not just the facts. The feeling is that the world is a book that learned to stitch its pages back in after fire. The feeling is that Antarctica is not remote. It is central. A stern librarian with frost in her hair who keeps the only copy of the story that will matter when we forget our own pronouns. The feeling is that Area 51 is not where we hid the thing, but where the thing hid us while it decided whether we were ready to be verbs. Sometimes, late, when the city's noise drops an octave and the neighbors' televisions relax their grip on the spectrum, I take the shard Mina left on my desk from my drawer. It's not supposed to be here. It's a violation that has never stopped being sweet. I hold it up to the streetlight and listen to the room. The shard vibrates a fraction. Hardly there. The screws in the faceplate by the door hold their faith. And under my tongue, the word that isn't a word moves like a promise. We drill thinking we are making holes. We are making sentences. If I go quiet now, it's not fear. It's respect. There is a long underside to the world, and those who keep it have been patient. We will not be the first to borrow their books. We may yet be worthy of returning them. They told us we were drilling through ice. They didn't tell us the ice was remembering us back.